Hi. In previous lectures, we have talked about the interaction paradigm and the interaction styles. Today, we are going to talk about what goes into interaction design process. Topics that we are going to discuss today: the iterative design versus user-centered design, and then we're going to talk about some of the interaction design models, and then we're gonna go for an overview of what is involved in the interaction design models. Iterative design. Iterative design is a design where you design a prototype or part of the project and then you evaluate and then you go back, redesign some of the things, and then you test and evaluate and so on until you get to the desired project. So it is like a dance, one step forward, two steps back. The solutions do not happen in a linear way. You go forward and then you go back. You evaluate, you change, and then you go forward again. From these problems, you will learn. You will get the ultimate design solution. There will always be room for improvement, and the knowledge path is constantly moving forward. So if we look at it, if we can envision it as the following: you start with the concept, you design, you evaluate, you come back and you change some things and you design again. But all the time in your knowledge path you are moving forward until you get to the final implementation. The other way is the user-centered design. User-centered design concentrates on the user conceptual view of what is needed to be done. So we always focus on users. Users are main players in these type of designs. Design should emerge from the users. Like we said, the users are the focal point. The design should emerge from the users. The tasks that they want, the goals that they want, and then the environment that they are working with. And it also concentrates on human-centric issues, how they work together, how they perceive things, what are the physical attributes and the conditions that the users deal with, what is the environment of these users. So all of it is user-centered. How can we get information? We can get information through user participation. Users are part of the design team. Users are consulted in each step. Or we can create focus groups. Focus groups means groups of stakeholders or users who are interviewed, and so that they provide a more thorough insight on what and how and why do they need to do things, etc., etc. We can also use questionnaires like the one you have in assignment 1. Questionnaires usually elicit information from a large group of users and provide insight into user preferences. We can also have what we call ethnographic observation. We go to the user environment, we work in the user environment, we shadow users. We might use audio or video recordings just to get the user impression on what they need done. Other user-centered methods are walkthroughs. Walkthroughs, you walk through with the users to decide what goals they want. They are meant to cover any problems. You walk through a certain workflow to understand what the user needs and to try and uncover what kind of problems or what types of problems that might appear during this process. There are also expert evaluations. You get experts or users who are experts in this area, and using usability guidelines, they perform evaluations from the user's point of view and document the results. We can also perform usability testing. We look at the prototype or the product that is needed, and we perform usability testing on it. Now we're going to talk about interaction design models. What types of design models we have? First type is the waterfall model. In the waterfall model was developed in the 1970s. It includes 3 stages: planning, commanding, and post analysis. So we start with the requirements, and as you can see, we don't move from the requirements to the design until we finish the requirements. We move to the design, but we evaluate the design. We might return to the requirements to actually change or manage changes or add requirements, take out requirements, and so on. Once we get through the design and everything is obvious in the design, we move on to the coding. And during the coding, we might come back to the design to see that there are changes in the design and so on. Once we code, we move to the testing and then to the maintenance. And it looks like a waterfall. That's where it got its name from. Okay, so we analyze and code. It's good for small projects. The programmers are the users. Requirements are not fixed, they might change, and this is not user-centered. It concentrates on requirements and requirements analysis. Advantages of the waterfall method: it's highly disciplined, easily observable development, easy to create, budget for, consistent review process. Disadvantages: it's document centric. It doesn't depend on the user, but rather on the documentation, on the requirement documentation, on the design documentation, and so on. The next model is the spiral model. The spiral model was developed in the late 1980s. It's more flexible. It concentrates on risk and risk reduction. It incorporates several prototype developments. It encourages iterations. Let's see how it looks like. We start with the requirements. And with the goals that we want. We perform a risk analysis. We come up with a prototype. The prototype, then we get the concept of operation. And out of this, we get the requirements plan and the life cycle plan for the project. Then we again perform risk analysis on those plans. We develop the prototype. We find what our software requirements are, or what our validation requirements are, and we come up with a development plan. Then we move to the next stage. We perform risk analysis on the development plan. We come up with a more developed prototype. We concentrate on what is needed for the software product design. Then we perform design validation and verification before the actual designing. And then we come up with an integration and testing plan, how to integrate it with other projects and how to test. Again, we perform risk analysis. We come up with the operational prototype with all the detailed design obvious. We perform the coding. We perform unit testing, integration testing, acceptance testing. We implement, and we come out at the end with the next phases, if there are next phases for the project. Advantages of the spiral model: it's appropriate for large-scale enterprise systems. We can have multiple sub-projects that work with each other. That's why we have integration testing. Flexibility in terms of its sensitivity to the dynamic nature. You can easily make changes. Disadvantages can be, complex for some customers to grasp. It requires extensive information regarding the risk. Undetected risks can be problematic, so we have to be very thorough when we look for or perform risk assessments. The next model is what we call the Dynamic Systems Development Method, DSDM. DSDM, it has three stages. We have the pre-project stage, we have the project implementation stage, and then we have the post-project implementation stage. It's business-centered. The main concept is that we perform a feasibility study and from the business point of view. So this is business-centered. And 80% of the software solution can be developed in 20% of the time. Like we said, we have three stages. Pre-project, we perform a feasibility study and business study. Now we iterate between the functional model iteration, design and build iteration, and implementation. So if we go back, functional model iteration and the design and business, we just move between those things, and then in the end we perform the testing and the implementation in the post-project phase. DSDM framework has 9 principles. Active user involvement is imperative because it should take the business point of view, etc., etc. Team must be empowered. They need to be empowered to make decisions. The focus is on frequent delivery of products. Fitness for business purposes. The most important thing is that it fits the business purpose. It's iterative and incremental because we are going back and forth between sub-stages. All changes during development are reversible. We can reverse changes. Requirements are baselined at a high level. We start with the high level requirements, and then through the iterations and stages, we make those requirements more and more detailed. Testing is integrated through the life cycle. We always test, implement, and test and come back. And there is always, during all the stages of the design, we have collaboration and cooperation among all the stakeholders. How do we perform it, or what helps us, what techniques help us succeed when we use this type of design? We need to have facilitated workshops, we need to have time boxing, we need to investigate, refine, and consolidate. We need to know, prioritize our requirements, what we should, must have, should have, could have, or don't need or won't have. The core technologies, we need to model the solution. We need to prototype from a business, usability, performance, and capability point of view. Then we need to perform testing. And in the end, we need to perform configuration management to fit the specific needs of the users. Advantages, they provide a technique-independent process. The process, is independent of a certain technique. You work with all the ingredients together. Flexible in terms of requirements evolution. You can change, take out, put in, etc., etc. Disadvantages might be that it focuses on RAD, or focusing on RAD can lead to decrease in code robustness because there might be changes, or there might be retractions, or there might be errors. The next one is the prototype-based models. The prototypes are used to develop, demonstrate, and test design ideas. These are suitable for small-scale projects. We create a prototype. That this prototype will enable us to discuss the look and feel, what the scope, how the information flows, and what the product concept that we need. We have two types of models. We have what we call the throwaway. Throwaway prototype is the prototype that we start with and we discuss what requirements are needed, etc., 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 and then we throw away, and then we start working with the evolutionary prototype. This is the prototype that we need to work with that will evolve into the final product. Advantages of prototyping: easy for users to give feedbacks, reduce development time and cost, involvement of the user in the development process. Disadvantages can be viewed by the client as the final product, may lead to insufficient analysis due to the ease of development, difficult for developers to discard and start creating the final product from scratch. You always depend on the previous prototype. We also have what we call the discount usability engineering. Discount usability engineering is we come up with scenarios, we simplify thinking, we put post-it notes, and we perform heuristic evaluations. Heuristic evaluations are evaluations that can be performed using a set of heuristic requirements. Nielsen proposed a set of 10 usability heuristics that we're going to discuss in the usability in future presentations. This will be discussed more thoroughly in the future presentations. We also have what we call contextual inquiry, where it involves observation, inquiry, and interpretation. We observe the users in their environment. We inquire about certain things. We interpret other things. And it is based on four main principles when we design. The context, what we need to design. How do we partnership with other stakeholders? What do we need to focus on? And how do we go about interpreting things? Context is how and why people use software. This is the context. Partnership, partnering with users in a master-apprentice relationship. We try to learn from them, what they do. Focus, we observe and collect information. We concentrate on tools, terminology, sequences, methods, interactions, everything that can be beneficiary to our design process. And then interpretation, we interpret what we have seen. We sort, organize, prioritize observations. The team creates models for communication, information sequences, physical environment, corporate culture, etc., to help us in the design process. Now, we have talked about some of the design models. We will take an overview of what is involved in the design model. First of all, let's look at the elements that appear in many of the standard models. We have cost and risk analysis, we have observations, we have task analysis, we have the requirements assessment, we have conceptual design, we have the physical design, we have prototyping, we have evaluation, we have usability testing, we have implementation and maintenance. Some of them or all of them might appear in each and every one of the models that were discussed before. If we look at the design process in general, we see that it consists of three phases. We have the discovery phase, the design phase, and the evaluation phase, with movement in between. Discovery contains things like task analysis, storyboarding, use cases, primary stakeholder profiles, and documentation of the requirements. In the design, we perform conceptual and physical design. We're going to talk about discovery in the next chapter and about the design in the next chapters. And then there is the evaluation, usability testing. We will also talk about it in future presentations. What are the discovery phase questions? What the components of the project are, who is involved in this project, what is the current workspace, what workflows are we going to work with, what are the contextual and extraneous factors that affect the workflow, etc., etc. For the design, we have two parts. We have the conceptual design and then the physical design. Conceptual design, what are the possible ways in which the design can address the needs, personas, who are the users, scenarios, what are the use scenarios and use cases, special requirements or the details of the requirements. And then we have the physical design. What are the possible ways that the conceptual design can be realized? We can have low fidelity prototypes using papers, using wood, using low fidelity types. We can have wireframes, or we can have functional prototypes, software functional prototypes, for example. And then we get to the evaluation. How do we measure the success? How do we test? How do users give us feedback? Usability testing. We document the results of the usability testing. And evaluation is not a discrete phase. It's layered. You have to come to go back and forth to be able to cover the whole spectrum of usage. Thank you for listening.